Hi guys, Grand J here, and today we're doing another deck workshop video. So in today's video, we're doing a mono water deck, and I call it Make It Rain. So this is a deck that I've been playing in a lot of my regionals recently, and I've had quite a bit of success with them. And it's the deck that I've used to go top 4, top 2, and win a regional. So I've had quite a bit of consistent success with this deck, so I'm sharing this with you guys, and yeah, showing you guys what I've been playing. So we're going to be doing this deck workshop video a little bit differently this time. So in previous times we've put it as all one long video, and it's been a little bit long. So this time we're breaking it down into two parts. So today is part one, where we introduce the deck and we go over some of the card selection, and you'll have the deck list available. And we'll be doing a part two that should be coming out either a day or 2 days afterwards, where we go more in depth about the overall strategy and talk about matchups. So let's get started. The general idea of the deck is it's all about creating economy, it's all about creating value, it's about planning forward, creating future resources, and getting maximum value out of your cards in CP. So a lot of these cards don't cost a lot, but they get a lot of value, a lot of effect out of the CP that you do pay for them. So yeah, it plays a very sort of mid-rangey sort of focus, and you're playing a lot of sort of mid-range forwards at around the 7,000-8,000 power mark. But we're using our buffs from our backups and our forwards to combine these to our mid-range forwards to push them up to a higher level power, so they can contest against your opponent's mid-size or high-end forwards as well. So, and in addition to this, the deck also uses a whole lot of defensive backups, such as Yuna and Minwoo, to really sort of protect your forwards, making sure that after you do get your forwards out, it's really difficult for your opponent to remove them and to respond. The deck is all about synergies, buffs, and good reactive plays. In regards to the overall stats of the deck, I'd rate about an 8, 8.5 in terms of power out of 10. It's strong, it's a good deck, but I'm not sure if it's as strong or as overpowering as, say, Earth or Fire. But it does make up for it with its other good stats as well. So in terms of speed, this deck is what I would consider a mid to more late gameish deck. It's definitely not a late game control deck because it's not sort of building up all these sort of backups or engines. It's getting a lot of really good value cards and sort of pushing around the mid game. In terms of consistency, this is by far probably one of the most consistent decks in the game right now. There's so many good search cards, there's so many good ways to cycle and to draw for this deck that very few times are you going to feel that you've lost the game because of bad luck. Most of the time it's simply because you made some misplays or your opponent might have overpowered you, but really you're not going to feel that you're going to lose the game because of your luck. In terms of difficulty, this deck is probably about 2.5 out of 10. It's not a very difficult deck to play. There's definitely nuance to it, and there's definitely ways that you can elevate yourself and make yourself a better player while playing this deck, but it's not an extremely difficult deck, and it doesn't have a lot of sort of moving pieces to it that you have to get right in order to succeed. So this deck is really good for players that like planning ahead and knowing what they want to play in following turns. It has a great way of being able to set itself up for future plays. And it's got a lot of strong reactive plays to it. So if you're someone that likes to think about what your opponent's got and to be able to one-up them, this is definitely a deck for you to try out. But enough introductions, let's get onto the deck itself. So the deck runs 24 forwards, 17 backups, and 9 summons, which is pretty standard for most decks these days. So let's start with the forwards. At free copies, we have 3 copies of Steiner. So this is definitely a no-brainer. This deck runs free of the Final Fantasy 9 engine, and it is such a good engine. I've played this a lot in a lot of my decks, and Steiner is probably like one of the best water cards at the moment. Not in terms of necessarily power, but what he brings to the table is really, really good. So, of course, you guys know it's a 6,000 power forward. When it comes into play, or when it EX bursts, you can search your deck for another FF9 card. So that includes backups or forwards. So it's a really strong ability, and yeah, while you have another FF9 character, including backups as well, he gets plus 1,000 power, so it puts him up to 7,000. So it's just such a value card. Even though it costs 5, you're effectively getting a free drop and you're getting a card back. So fantastic card. It's an EX burst. I feel bad that I can't put more of these guys in my deck because every time I feel I play him, I've only got 1 or 2 more copies left in deck. And as an EX burst, it's fantastic as well. Next card is 3 copies of Garnet. So Garnet is one of those cards that on paper didn't seem super impressive, but the more you play with her, the more imposing you realize she is. Simply because, look, at free cost 7,000 power, she's on par with what she's supposed to be. But a couple of weeks ago, there was a Facebook post of someone who was equally as unaware about Garnet as we were initially, and my Facebook post in response to him was this: Garnet Forward on curve. She makes your summons cheaper. She buffs your guys. She color fixes, allowing you to play other summons out of blue color. And she also is immune to summons. What else do you want your forward to have? Seriously, this card has just got so many components to her, and she's just fantastic on all these different dimensions. So of course, she allows us to play like summons of other colors. So in this deck, we're running 3 copies of Belias, which is a fantastic summon. Also, yeah, she's summon immune, so the big target that really sort of hits her a lot would be Leviathan or Odin, but like your opponent can't use these cards, so it's a fantastic card in that regard, and also just buffs your forward. So there are plenty of times where you just playing a summon and just gives your guys plus that plus 1000. So she's just a fantastic card all around. She's searchable by Steiner as well, so it's a no-brainer. She's in the deck as a free off. Next card in the deck is 3 copies of Zidane. So Zidane is one of those cards that people sometimes run 2 copies of, but in this deck I run 3 copies. And the reason for that is Zidane is such a good value card. So while you have an FF9 character, he comes in at 2 costs, and when he comes into play, you can either draw a card, make your opponent discard a card, or reactivate all your FF9 characters. So at 2 copies, there's less likelihood of you bricking your hand, as in you have too many of these like cards in your hand and you're unable to discard extra copies to play cards. So at 3 copies, there's a greater chance of that occurring, but he's such a strong card that I don't think it's too much of an issue. In addition to this, the way that we've sort of built or we're playing this deck, we're not going to be using Steiner to search for Zidane so much. So the reason why we're playing 3 is when you have 3 copies of Zidane, anytime you have an FF9 character on the field, which is either Steiner or Garnet, you're going to be playing Zidane. And you don't really want to be in a situation where you're using Steiners or your Icos to search for Zidane. You want to naturally draw into him, because when he comes in, he's effectively a free card. So you want to have 3 of him, never have to search for him, and just have him pop in every now and then, and just draw him on a regular basis, and be able to chuck him down and net yourself a card back. It is a fantastic card. It's almost on the level of Pain in Riku Unit Pain decks, but it's a little bit more expensive in that regard. But you never really want to be searching this guy. You want to naturally draw into him, and you want to capitalize on it every time you draw into this guy. So at 3 copies, we're going to see him very regularly, and he's going to be contesting the field. Next, we have 3 copies of Tidus Legend. So a card that's sort of seen some minor amount of play recently is Tidus Legend. So at 7,000 power at 4 costs, he's a bit below the curve, but he's got an ability that makes up for it. So for each other forward that you have on the field, Tidus gets plus 1,000 power. So obviously, the water deck, where you're able to play a lot of characters such as Steiner and such as Zidane really cheaply, the larger your Tidus gets. So it's very easy that for your Tidus to be sitting around the 9,000, 10,000 power mark, which is above where a 4 cost typically is. In addition to this, Tidus also has a really strong secondary ability, or his S ability, which is Blitz Ace. So for paying S and 2 water, you're able to attack your opponent as many times as you've taken damage. And he also gets Brave as well, obviously. So this is a really strong ability. It's a really strong effect, and it's very difficult to play against. Because there are times where your opponent could be in a situation where they have put you down to, they've dealt a reasonable amount of damage to you, and you've dealt a bit of damage to them. Your opponent always has to play with the mentality that any turn you can just Blitz Ace him, and just push him for 4 or 5 damage and just win the game. Tidus L is just strong in that regard. He's strong as a forward, and he also has the ability to just push your opponent for game, and your opponent always has to hesitate. Your opponent always has to think about it. There were one or few games in like the regionals that I played where I was able to use Tidus to just sweep through for 3 or 4 damage. There was actually one game in the top 8 for the regional that I won where I was able to sweep through 6 damage all in one turn and just like win the game with Tidus. So Tidus is definitely a card that's nuanced, and it's going to take some skill to learn how to play with Tidus. But in those situations where you do pull him off, he can certainly just bring you back from games where you really had no chance of winning. Next card is 3 copies of Lenna, and this card I initially didn't think was as great as it ended up being, but like all these cards that have a value effect to them, all they need is one really good pairing, and then immediately they become really, really strong. And in this case, this card is searching for one of your copies of Knight from the graveyard. So when Lenna comes into play, she's a 5 cost forward. She's able to search for a 2 cost water forward from your break zone or your discard pile and put it back onto the field. So typically 2 cost forwards aren't that strong, and it's also limited to a water 2 cost forward. But there are 2 particular examples in this deck that are very, very strong. So in the mid game, you'll probably be using Lenna to search your grave zone for a Fame Mimic Go-Go. But towards the later game, when you have 5 backups, you're going to be using it to search for Knight, which is a very, very strong forward. In addition, her S ability also allows you to bring forwards back from the grave back onto the field. It's not an effect that you'll use very often, and this deck doesn't really have too many forwards that really capitalize on this. You don't really have that many big forwards in water, but in those few scenarios where you are able to use it, it's just like an extra bonus for when you have extra S copies of it in your hand as well. So this is a great card, and I don't see water decks running without it. So continuing on from that, we have 3 copies of Knight. So Knight is a 2-cost forward, and at only 3,000 power, it's not particularly impressive. But the strength of Knight is that for every backup you control, Knight gets plus 1,000 power. So at 5 backups, Knight's going to be sitting at 8,000 power for a 2-cost, which is really, really good value. You don't really see other 2-cost forwards being at that sort of level power without a similar level drawback. A good example would be in Earth. There's 2-cost Dark Knight, which gets plus 1,000 power for each damage you receive. But in this case, Knight is actually a little bit stronger and isn't so reliant on you receiving damage. So with Waka on the field, and having 5 backups, Knight gets plus 6,000 power. So in effect, Knight becomes a 9,000 power forward. So you think about it, towards the late game when you have 5 backups down, and if one of them is Waka, you can play Lenna, which is an 8,000 power forward with Waka, and then you're able to get Knight back onto the field, which is 9,000 power forward. For 5 CP, you're able to get 8,000 and a 9,000 power forward. Both really strong, and it gives you like a huge amount of value. In addition to this, just like if you draw Knights towards the mid-late game, and you have, say, 4 backups down, and one of them is a Waka, you can just play it, and it's an 8,000 power forward at 2, which is great value as well. And then, yeah, you just use Lenna to recur them. This is going to be what's going to push you over the line and win games for you towards the mid-late game. When your opponent's running out of steam and you're running out of steam, you top deck a card, you play Lenna down, you get 2 big forwards, and your opponent has to respond to a lot of pressure immediately. And that is what makes this happen. Next, moving on to the 2 elves, we have 2 copies of Cagnazzo. So Cagnazzo is a forward, is a 3-cost forward that when it comes into play, your opponent's forwards lose power equal to the number of forwards you have divided by 2. So it's a great card that you can play around the mid game to give all your opponent's forwards a debuff and allows your guys to attack through. In addition, he's also got an ability where he receives 4,000 less damage during your opponent's turn, so he's a great blocker in that regard as well. You combine this with Minwu, there's got anything under 8,000 damage is going to deal no damage whatsoever. So that's a really strong ability by itself. If you add Walker on top, it's anything under 8,000 is just not going to do anything to him. So this card is really strong in that regard. Some decks run him as a 3-elf. I run him as a 2-elf because I feel he's a little bit finicky. But yeah, definitely it's up to you to sort of like adjust and play around with it yourself. In addition, Cagnazzo also has some fun synergies with Scholar. So if you do have a situation where you sort of really built up a big board, there's potential for you to play Cagnazzo, give all your opponent's guys, say, minus 5,000 power, use Scholar, put it back in your hand, you play it down again, and to give your opponent, say, another minus 4,000 on all their guys, you can potentially board wipe your opponent if you have a big enough board. So Cagnazzo's really quite strong, both in the mid game, but he also has an extra little sort of power towards the late game as well. So yeah, it's a great card. Next, we have 2 copies of Fame Mimic Go-Go. Fame Mimic Go-Go, I originally, again, this deck is all, like, really sort of had me misled on how good so many of these cards are. So Fame Mimic Go-Go is a 7,000 power forward, and it costs only 1 CP. So it's actually very good value. You're paying 2 less CP than what you would typically get at a 7,000 power forward. In addition to this, his drawback, however, is that if your opponent has no forwards on the field, then Fame Mimic Go-Go gets sent to the break zone. There's nothing you can do about that. But the thing is that in general, you're playing Fame Mimic Go-Go whenever your opponent has forwards. So Fame Mimic Go-Go is all about responding to your opponent's aggression and having a cheap, effective way to deal with it. And that's what Fame Mimic Go-Go does. If your opponent is playing a 7,000 power forward really early in the game, or if they play, say, like a turn 1 Seraphy, and put something on the field, you can respond with just 1 backup, put a Fame Mimic Go-Go down, and sort of deal with your opponent's forwards. And then your opponent are either going to use removal on him, or like it's going to stop some of their attacks, which is great because that's all we want. All we want to do is just commit one CP, one card, and to be able to stop anything that's mid-range size and below. So he's a great card in that regard. He also has a S ability called Power Hit where he can destroy another forward as long as he's taking any sort of damage, which is kind of a sort of very niche situation. Because we're running Minwoo, this effect generally isn't active, but in a few situations where you don't have Minwoo active, and he does receive some damage, maybe if he's blocking a smaller forward, you can discard an extra copy of him in order to like destroy one of your opponent's forwards. Effect that you won't use too often, but it's there in the very few rare situations where it might occur. Next, we have 2 copies of Ashe, and Ashe is such a versatile card. She is almost like a secondary Garnet in a way, in that how she's so versatile. So Ashe, she has 3 abilities. One allows her to reactivate for 2 water, which is fantastic against lightning and ice matchups. She's also, like, her main ability is that whenever she's chosen by opponent's summon or ability, she gets plus 3,000 power. So in any sort of situation where your opponent's trying to deal packets of damage to her, or your opponent is trying to debuff her, she's highly resistant. She's probably the card that will single-handedly win you lightning matchups, simply because there's very few options your opponent has to deal with it. Your opponent will literally have to use a ball wiping summon, such as Exodus or Cyclops, or use one of their owns on her. So she's absolutely amazing. And also, she's got an S ability. On the very rare occasion where you sort of want Ashe to be blocking something bigger, she can discard additional Ashe to give herself a pump, and to give herself first strike as well. So Ashe is great. You got to know which matchups to use her in, but she's great in so many matchups. Moving on to the backups, we have 17 backups in this deck. So we have 3 copies of Waka to begin with, and this is a no-brainer. Obviously, in any sort of monocolor deck, you're going to be running the 3-cost backup that gives all of them plus 1,000 power. That's, no questions asked, that's going to be the case. Next, we have 2 copies of Artemision. And so Artemision is a card that is slept on a little bit. People see it and they don't think it's super amazing. I had a little discussion with Chris a couple of weeks ago who didn't think it was so good, but after playing with this card, I think it's absolutely fantastic. If you can get this card in your opening hand, you can feel free to just not mulligan that hand, because all you have to do, if this card is in your opening hand, all you have to do is just play this backup. Most of the time, or nearly all the time, on your first turn, you're going to want to get a backup in. So as long as you're holding an Artemision, you can play an Artemision down and put any cards you don't want to keep back to the bottom of your deck. So it's absolutely fantastic. Pretty much any hand that you start off with Artemision, keep it. Because as long as you can put it down, and you're going to have at least one other water card in your hand, you can put Artemision down, put all the garbage cards or all the sort of late game cards at the bottom of your deck, and then draw a fresh new hand. In addition, you don't have to put your entire hand down. So if there are 1 or 2 cards in your hand that you want to keep for the matchup, then you just basically put all the rest of the other cards back into the bottom of your deck. As a side benefit as well, it is an FF9 card. So if you are playing a Steiner and you don't want to grab a Zidane or grab a Garnet, you just want a water card to discard for another ability or for CP, you can always grab an extra copy of Artemision towards the mid game as well. Not only that, if you ever do use Zidane's third ability to reactivate all your FF9 characters, Artemision's an FF9 character, so she's going to be he's going to be able to reactivate from your Zidane's third ability. So it's just a little kind of side bonus to it all as well. Next, we have 2 copies of Minwoo. So Minwoo obviously is a fantastic card. People question its relevance in the metagame. So that's why we're not running it at 3 copies, simply because in certain matchups it's not as relevant. Typically in water it's not going to be too relevant, and in earth it's not going to be too relevant. But in the few situations where it is relevant, typically in wind, in lightning, and in fire, it's going to be really difficult for your opponent to get around. One of the biggest tools that lightning has in a lot of matchups is to be able to use Ousted. And if you have Minwoo down, your opponent's going to be very limited with the amount of ping damage or packet damage that they can put through to you. Minwoo's great. We have 2 copies of them in those situations where you do need it. It's also very relevant for Tidus, because whenever you do use Tidus' Blitz Ace and you're attacking, say, 3 or 4 times, if your opponent has, say, 1 or 2 blockers, if he's accumulating damage, then all your opponent needs to do is just block Tidus twice, and then Tidus dies. But if you have Minwoo out, it doesn't matter how many blockers your opponent has, as long as his Tidus is bigger than your opponent's forwards, then every time he attacks, Minwoo trigger will protect him, and he can just clear out opponent board. So that's another reason why we run Minwoo as well. Next, we have 2 copies of Yuna H. So This deck runs Yuna H as opposed to Yuna R. Yuna H is a 5-cost backup summon that when it comes into play, you can return a forward back to the owner's hand, and also it has an ongoing ability of whenever a forward is sent to a break zone, when a character is sent to a break zone, you can remove from the game instead. And so Yuna's ability is really strong on two fronts. One, she's a tempo play in that you can sort of play around the mid game, bounce one of your opponent's forwards back up the hand, and just let some of your forwards swing in. But in addition, she just protects you from enter break zone abilities, and there's so many really good enter break zone abilities in the game right now. Golbez is probably the biggest and most relevant one, but also Renault's very good. You got Zac, you've got Emperor Zan, you've got a lot of these really strong abilities as well. So just being able to make it so your opponent's enter break zone abilities don't trigger is really strong. In the matchups where you don't need it, such as say Wind, you just don't play it. So in addition, it's also an EX burst as well. So if it's an extra card that if you do take damage, you can bounce one of your opponent's forwards back to their hands as well. So it's great on several levels. The problem with running Yuna H is that we're not able to run Yuna R. So that's typically, for a lot of war decks, a bit of a deal breaker. However, because we're playing Garnet, using her ability can make your water summons cheaper. It's kind of redundant to use both Yuna R and Garnet at the same time. So in that regard, we don't feel too bad by not using Yuna R because we have Garnet available to us to make our summons cheaper. Next, we have 2 copies of Ico. So we're using the searching Ico. So this is pretty much a no-brainer as well. It's a free cost backup like any of the category searchers. It searches for any category 9 forward. So it's limited to forwards as opposed to Steiner, which can search for any FF9 character. So in that regard, typically we'll be using Ico, using her to search for Steiner, and then using Steiner to search for someone else. So Ico is a fantastic card. It's a free cost backup. It allows you to grab a card, and then you just ramp up from there. It's just like another 2-cost backup that allows you to play more forwards. Next, we have 2 copies of Astrologian. So Astrologian is a backup that's a bit iffy. In certain metagames, it'll be quite strong, and in certain metagames, it probably won't be that relevant to you. So it's a 2-cost backup, which is very relevant in putting it in early. And at the same time, it has the ability where you can pay 2 water and dull it in order to reactivate one of your forwards. So of course, this is really strong against both lightning and ice. So it allows you to reactivate your forwards because those are decks that have a lot of dulling and freezing type abilities. So it's really strong in that regard. But in addition, it's also typically used to allow your Tidus to both be a shield and a sword. So Tidus is probably going to be the strongest forward you have on the field by quite a margin. He's probably going to be around the 9 to 11k mark. So after you attack with him, if your opponent doesn't block with him, you've lost your biggest forward to block with. So by having Astrologian available, you can attack with Tidus and then reactivate him so he's able to block on defense as well, which is another reason we use Astrologian. So we run 2 copies to basically allow Tidus to be offense and defense, as well as in certain matchups such as in Ice and Lightning, we can just reactivate our forwards using her ability. Next, we have 2 copies of Scholar. So Scholar is a forward that is a backup that I've loved since Opus 1. At 2 costs, it's a backup that you can put into play at any time without feeling any sort of major issues, and it's always got a relevant ability that you can always dull it, break it to put a forward from your field back to your hand, which is great in all those situations where you want to have extra copies of enter play ability cards, so such as Steiner, such as Zidane, such as Lenna. Typically, this deck will be used to recur Lennas or Cagnazos, simply because those are probably the most game-breaking or most relevant effects that the deck has on coming to play abilities. But also, it can be used to protect some of your forwards. So if your opponent is using a destruction ability to remove one of your forwards, if you don't want to loot that forward, you can always use Scholar to put it back to your hand and allow you to play it next turn again. So it's great, it's a really flexible card, and it's a cheap backup. You put it into play, at some point it's going to be relevant, and you just use it. Next to backups, we have Mog 9, 1 copy of Mog 9. So we're running 1 copy of it just as a little bonus, but it's not a backup that we want to see too often, and it's a little bit iffy at some situations as well. So it's a free cost backup. If you control Ico, when you put it into play, it allows you to draw 1 card. So in effect, it kind of becomes a 1 CP backup if you control Ico. And in a deck that's very focused on FF9, we'll have Ico out very regularly. In addition to that, it's got an ability where you can pay 2 CP and dull it and break it in order to bounce one of your opponent's forwards back to their hand. So again, it just has like a sort of another Leviathan effect built into it, which is pretty strong considering that you're drawing a card from it. This deck wants to get five backups down as soon as possible, simply because that makes Knight as big as it can. So this is just like another cheap, efficient way for us to get backups in, and if it becomes relevant, we can use it to bounce one of your opponent's forwards back to hand at some point later in the game. And finally, to round out our backup line, we have one copy of Cosmos. And the reason why we're running this one copy of Cosmos is simply so when we don't have Garnet on the field, we're able to use some of our off-color summons. So this deck runs 3 copies of Belize and 1 copy of Hecaton Care, and while we have Garnet on the field, we can always pay 2 water to play them, but in certain situations where if we either don't have Garnet, or your opponent has the Emperor, which locks out our Garnet's payment ability, it allows you to cast those summons using using Cosmos's ability to cast different colored like CP. So yeah, Cosmos is there is just kind of like a little fallback in case we don't have Garnet. Otherwise, it's not too important. We're running 1 copy just so we don't want to have it as a dead card in situations where it's not relevant. And moving on to our summons, we're running 9 summons, and most of them are going to be pretty common, but the other ones are going to be a little bit interesting. So we're running 3 copies of Leviathan, so this is not too controversial. Leviathan's just a really good summon. It's a water summon. We can make it cheaper using Garnet's ability. It's an EX burst, so in a situation where you want to open your opponent's defense up to attack with, say, 2 or 3 forwards, you got that ability. If your opponent has a lot of aggression, you can just put their forwards back to hand to give yourself some breathing room. If it's an EX burst, it's fantastic. Your opponent is hitting you aggressively early on. You get the EX burst with Leviathan, you can put it back to your hand, and most importantly, it stops enter break zone. It stops decks that rely on enter break zone abilities, such as Golbez. So holding these against Golbez is probably the most important way to win that matchup. Whenever your opponent has a Golbez on the field, you always want to have a Leviathan, and you always have to have it ready in case your opponent uses something, say a Deleter or some other card to break it. You want to be able to put that card back to your opponent's hand so you don't get that value from it. Next, we have 3 copies of Belias the Gigas. So Belias the Gigas is a really strong, fantastic summon. At 2 CP, it's able to give a forward plus 1000 power and draws you a card. It also gives them first strike and haste as well. So it's just like, again, this deck has so many cards that are very versatile in so many situations. So as a combat pump, plus 1000 power doesn't seem super impressive, but when you consider that Garnet also gives all you guys plus 1000 power as well, it effectively, while Garnet's on the field, it gives plus 2000 power. But in addition to that, it also gives it first strike as well. So it means that any sort of situation where your forwards are at the same power, it means that yours is going to win. So it's, in a way, it's kind of like plus 3000 power in certain situations. So it's strong in that regard. It makes it first strike. So if your forward has taken some chip damage during the turn, then a Belias will allow you to sort of win the fight outright. In addition to this, it also nets you a card, which is great. Like, there's no reason not to draw cards. So as an EX burst, it's great because as an EX burst, it just draws you a card. And sometimes you can use its ability to give one of your forwards haste and first strike. So it can occasionally be useful when you receive your first damage, and then you get Belias, and then you can stop the rest of your opponent's attacks simply because you were able to cast it. And it also draws you a card. So that's another big reason why we run this over, say, 3 copies of Cyclops. While Cyclops gives you a much bigger combat swing, so while you have Garnet on the field, Cyclops does give you effectively a 4,000 power swing difference. Belias gives you a little bit less, but it doesn't draw you a card. So Cyclops typically isn't super effective or super relevant if you hit it off an EX burst. Next, we have 2 copies of Choo Lane the Impure, and this is a very similar situation to Belias as well. So this is just going to be able to debuff one of your opponent's forwards. In certain situations, you're able to just kill forwards outright if they have enough backups dulled. This is typically an offensive summon, simply because when you're attacking, your opponent will usually have backups that have been dulled during their turn. It draws you a card as well. So this deck is all about drawing cards. You can use it, debuff your opponent, and then draw yourself an extra card. So this is a great card in that regard as well. Again, as an EX burst, it just draws you cards. This deck is all about the economy. Every time you play cards, you're going to net yourself cards back, and you're also winning combat from it as well. And to round out, we have 1 copy of Hecaton Care. So yeah, again, because we have Cosmos and we have Garnet, we're able to color fix, we're able to play these off-color summons, and Hecaton Care is just a very relevant summon to have in the current metagame, simply because pretty much any deck that's monocolor is going to be running the free cost CP backups that give all the guys plus 1000 power. In addition, it also hits anything that's 4 and up. So backups that we probably see that are sort of in the 3-4 cost range at the moment is we're going to see Edwards, we're going to see Marias, we're going to see Kefkas. So there are a lot of really good big backups that you can always cast Hecaton Care and you're going to have relevant effects with. So we run 1 copy as a random situational summon that we can play, but it's going to be random it's going to be relevant in most of the matchups that you used it. So yeah, that's our mono water deck list. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really do recommend you guys give it a shot, especially for you guys that are wondering what to play. This deck is strong, it's consistent, and it has a lot of options. There's some minor tweaks that you can make to the deck depending on your local metagame, but I'll be going more into depth in those in my next part of this video. So, for people who want to learn more about the deck and how to play it better and how to deal with matchups, I'm going to be releasing a part 2 very soon, probably tomorrow or the day after, where we do more in-depth discussion and strategy into how to play the deck and the matchups. So until then, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. Grand J out.